Hey, have you ever really stopped to wonder why some people are left-handed? It seems like such a simple thing, right? But the answer? Well, it takes us on a deep dive into our own DNA, the wiring of our brains, and even a little bit of human history. So, let's get into it.
So get this, about 10% of the entire world's population is left-handed. And what's really wild is that this isn't some new trend. That number, 10%, has been incredibly stable throughout all of human history and across pretty much every culture on Earth. It's just a consistent, fundamental part of who we are as a species.
But that immediately makes you ask the question, right? Why this specific 90-10 split? If it were totally random, you'd expect it to be closer to a 50-50 coin flip. The fact that it's so heavily skewed toward right-handedness, well, that tells us there's something really profound going on. So let's play detective, follow the scientific clues, and see if we can crack this puzzle.
Our investigation into this whole 10% mystery, it's going to start with our first big piece of evidence, and it's hidden deep inside all of us, our DNA. So, the obvious first question, is it in our genes? I mean, you've probably noticed that handedness seems to run in families. Left-handed parents are definitely more likely to have left-handed kids, but, and this is a big but, the genetic story here is way more complicated than it looks on the surface. Just think about this for a second. Even if you have two parents who are both left-handed, the chance of their kid being a lefty is only about 25%. So right away, that tells us this is not some simple dominant or recessive gene thing we all learned about in high school biology. It's not that clean. Yep, that old idea of a single lefty gene that just gets passed down, that's a total myth. We can just toss that one out. The reality is much, much messier. It's more like a complex genetic lottery. We're talking about dozens of different genes that each pitch in a tiny little bit, and they all interact with each other. And, this is crucial, with a huge element of just pure chance.
So scientists call this a polygenic trait. Basically, the genes involved don't have a label that says use left hand or use right hand. What they do is influence the body's basic blueprint for left-right asymmetry. But here's the real kicker. You add up all those genetic factors, and they only explain about 25% of why a person is left or right-handed. That means a whopping 75% of the story is somewhere else.
Okay, since genes are clearly just one small part of the story, our next clue takes us away from our DNA and into the most complex and incredible organ we have, the brain.
And the key idea we need to understand here is something called brain lateralization. Now that's a fancy-sounding term, but the concept is actually pretty simple. It just means our brain is split into two halves, a left and a right hemisphere. And these two halves, they aren't perfect mirror images. They actually specialize in doing different jobs.
So for the vast majority of us, like over 90% of people, the left hemisphere is the command center for language. It's where all that processing happens. And here's the twist. That same left hemisphere also controls the right side of the body. You see that cross-wiring? That is a critical piece of the puzzle for understanding why right-handedness is so incredibly common.
But this is where it gets really, really interesting. Look at left-handers. While 95% of righties have their language center in the left hemisphere, that number drops all the way down to 70% for lefties. So what about that other 30% of left-handers? Well, for them, language is either based in the right hemisphere or it's spread out more evenly across both sides of the brain. So what does that all mean? It suggests that the brains of left-handed people can be organized in a fundamentally different way. They're often less lopsided or asymmetrical than the brains of right-handers. This unique wiring is another huge piece of our puzzle. It shows us the difference isn't just in which hand you use, but in the actual structure of your brain. But of course, our genes and our brains don't exist in a vacuum, right? They're out in the world. And that brings us to our final clue, which explores the really powerful and sometimes pretty heavy hand of the world we're all born into.
Man, the historical bias against left-handedness is it runs deep. I mean, the English word sinister literally comes from the Latin word for left. For centuries, being a lefty was seen as a flaw, something wrong. And it wasn't that long ago, in the 20th century, that schools would actually force kids to write with their right hands. And while that direct stigma has mostly faded, thank goodness, its legacy is still all around us.
Just stop and think about the everyday stuff around you. Scissors, spiral notebooks that always smudge your hand, those little one-armed school desks, can openers. I mean, the list goes on and on. They are almost all designed by right-handed people for right-handed people.
This creates this subtle but constant pressure from our environment that just favors and reinforces right-handedness from the moment we're born.
Okay, so we followed the clues from our genes to our brains and through our culture. What's the final verdict? How do we put all these pieces together and finally solve the handedness puzzle?
The first, and honestly the most important thing to understand, is this. There is no single cause. It's not one thing. It's not one gene. It's not one part of the brain. It's not one cultural pressure. It's a really complex trait that pops up from the dynamic, messy interplay of all these factors working together.
You know, a great way to think about it is like a three-step recipe, or maybe a card game. First, your genetics deal the cards. They create a slight nudge, a predisposition one way or the other. Then, your brain's development while you're still in the womb plays that hand, and it's heavily influenced by just a ton of random chance. And finally, the culture you're born into, that sets the rules of the game, which, for most of history, has nudged almost everyone toward playing with their right hand.
You know, this quote just nails it perfectly. Handedness really is like a beautiful woven tapestry. You've got these threads of nature, our biology, and threads of nurture, our experience, all intertwined. It's not a simple on-off switch. It's this incredibly complex and amazing result of biology, pure chance, and the world we happen to live in.
So the next time you pick up a pen or you see somebody using their left hand, you'll know. You'll know the incredibly intricate story of genetics, neurology, and history that led to that one simple action. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What are the things about ourselves that we think are so simple are actually way more complex than we ever imagined?